بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله المبعوث رحمة للعالمين. So we have two charts here. We wanted to pause for a minute before going into designated section today, which is a continuation of the discussion from last week on that which invalidates the salah. These two charts come from the work of Imam Sharani. The one on the right, this one here, it lists 18 madhabs, right? 18 madhabs in fiqh. And so, interestingly enough, Imam Sha'rani, rahmatullahi alayhi, breaks away from that idea of just four madhab in the history of fiqh. Yeah, four madhab became uh, solidified in the later times, especially during the late Ottoman Empire. But historically, you find that that concept was not always dominant. So here in the middle, right here, uh, this section right here, he's dealing with that's the core of the Sharia, and he calls it the core of the Sharia, the pure Sharia, and then like on the sides, like this is the madhab of Atta, this is the madhab of Mujahid, this is the madhab of Imam al-Layth. But even before, when you go above, this is the madhab of Ibn Masud, of Umar, of Aisha, of Ishaq, like that. Then here you have Shafi'i, you have Al-Amish, uh, and here you have Aisha, Ibn Umar, Ibn Masud, Ata, Mujahid, Al-Layth, Dawood, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ibn Ahmed, Al-Thawri, Sufyan Ibn Uyayna, Al-Tabari, Umar Abdul Aziz, Al-Amish, Al-Sha'bi, and Ishaq Ibn Rahaway. So he's given that idea, right, that these schools existed and they existed because of the Sharia. They existed because of the discussion that the scholars had on um the scholars had on Sharia itself in terms of detailing stuff out. He gives that understanding over here a lot more clear. This is the Sharia here.
Which is the Sharia? Because you only got the two. Oh, okay. I see you painting
That's
it.
the
All right.
Sharia. Yeah. So this area here, this circle constitutes the Sharia. These little areas constitute the thinking of the scholars that are built upon the Sharia, and then generations, so each generation is kind of building on what came before. But the idea there also is that, you know, that is the thinking of the scholars, separate from the Sharia, is based on it, but the Sharia remains at its core. And so the idea is that scholarship, it exists to clarify some
Right.
details of the deen, but it's not equivalent to the deen. Right on. So that's something that's important to understand. It's a hard one for a lot of people, especially those who are very uh on both sides of the on both sides of the fence, so to speak. There's those who just say Quran and Sunnah, and those who say, "Oh, we have to follow the Madhabs." They both don't get this intricacy at times. And really, it's not the scholars; it's the people,
Right.
because in scholarship, you have your methodology, and you work out of that. But the people, a lot of times, the way they understand or they hear differences amongst the scholars, or they hear people talk about those differences, and that's where the confusion comes from, right? So the historically, the four madhab was solidified later on, and part of that solidification, in terms of giving them a space, part of that was an organizational issue. But even when we look at history, like in the Ottoman Empire, and that needs a lot more research on my part, but there is research and there's evidence to prove that it was not always tolerant. So, for instance, and that tolerance could have come for a number of different reasons. Like in the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans at times will marginalize the other madhab and impose the Hanafi school, right? And they did that at times by not allowing them to take certain positions, right, in the court systems or having authority and so on and so forth.
Yes, you quick question. It's pertaining to what you were just talking right here, right? All right. So out of all these that I'm just kind of counting, it's probably like what 18 of them we see in here, 17, 18, right? Like why didn't a lot of these survive? Why didn't, you know what I mean? And then the ones that did survive, out of your opinion, which is like the most like easiest one, like people friendly. If you understand what I'm saying?
Depends on what, yeah. If like those are different questions, but technically, those madahib at times are incorporated into the other madahib in some way or another. Maybe not fully, but the positions or their scholarship sometimes is merged into the other madhab. Uh, Sometimes, and this is not even, he didn't even include, there's more madhab than this. Like he talked about Abu Hanifa, but then he didn't talk about Ibn Abi Layla, right? And so Actually, a lot of the madhab that he included there are very strong hadith-based madhab, with the exception of maybe like Ibn Masud, there and a couple of others. But because those madhab are more the other madhab, like Abu Hanifa and Ibn Masud and others, they're focused on their methodologies to focus on the rationale behind the ruling. So the madhab have their different points of emphasis. And that's really what I believe Sharani is bringing out. That the madhab have their points of focus. Aisha was another one like that. That she was like into the rationale and in the objectives of the rule. That doesn't mean that the others were not. But for instance, Imam Ahmed didn't even want a madhab to follow him. He wanted people to study Sharia directly, Quran and Sunnah directly. Um, and it was his students, which included his son, that codified his fiqh, that organized and codified, which means systematized and wrote, not just wrote it down, but systematized it as well. So,
Sheikh Yusuf,
yeah,
Assalamualaikum.
walaikum salam.
Um, I had asked the same question that Brother Resto had asked one time, and I was told that the Maliki madhab was the most easiest to follow, um, especially for somebody who's new to the deen.
Yeah, but
What do you?
that's another question.
Oh, okay,
That's the he asked a couple questions.
okay.
One of the questions that he asked was uh, about the survival of the other madhab,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's what we were trying to. There's more madhab than this, right?
Right.
And then in some ways, what he's saying here, it goes against even what, for instance, Sheikh Ramadan al-Buti, rahmatullahi alayhi, wrote about, which has become a book to be used as a sword against the Salafiyah, which is the idea of la madhabiyah, that there's
Mm-hmm.
no madhab, right? The Sheikh al-Buti wrote against that, rahmatullahi alayhi. And he said that the core thesis was that the Salafiyya is yani Zaman Mubarak, is a blessed age. It's not a madhab. But ironically, I get what he's saying. It's a position that it solidifies people's understanding with regard to methodology and so on and so forth. But from the other side, is not 100% what is being taught. Like when you
Yeah.
study in the Azhar, they don't tell you that there's only four madhabs.
Right.
And and actually in the fiqh books, you will see things like the madhab of Aisha. And the matter of fact, the madhab of Aisha has a specific meaning in, like, in certain cases. Um, she took certain positions, so her position is used in family, in blended families at times, which she allowed for breastfeeding even of an older person to be a way for a child to be integrated or someone to be integrated into the family with the
Mm.
mahram problem, right? To overcome the mahram problem, that people can become milk brothers and milk sisters, right? Which is her own opinion, but So I'm just using that as an example to say that um I'm using that as an example to say that it's known because even in Syria, when they go back and they start teaching fiqh, Sharia, they teach these points that there's more than one madhab. This is not like a Salafi deconstruction of fiqh. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's his own set of issues, the Salafiyah and the way they approach fiqh. But in the attempt to protect the whole concept of the four madhabs, that argument is made, but it's not a good argument because it doesn't. What it does is it limits the rich heritage and the diversity of thought that is there in what they're calling tradition.
Yeah, it's trying to streamline it in the sake of not confusing the people, but then it's almost like you're not giving us much of a choice or background information.
Yeah, but see that a lot of times what happens is that some arguments, the mistake of some of these brothers, and part of them, some of them were Salafis before, and then they become
Mm-hmm.
Sufis. But the mistake is when you translate certain things, certain concepts, certain ideas, they have to be prefaced and they have to be couched and introduced.
Yeah.
And so that means the new environment that you're taking that concept into, you have to prepare that environment, and so you have to prepare those people to understand where those arguments are coming from and why it is that that argument is made. You can't just translate that without any context or without really clarifying for the people,
Right.
right? So, even in this context, Sharani is is known. Sharani is is known to be a Sufi.
Mm-hmm.
So Imam Sharani, rahmatullahi alayhi, here he's trying to resolve the conflict as well because there was some sort of conflict that existed among the different schools, even though some try to downplay it, right? So when you do a good history of fiqh, part of that history of fiqh is not just talking about that there existed uh, these schools that eventually develop. Schools here literally means institutions. I'm not talking about schools of thought. And then eventually they solidify a standing for the four madhabs. No, you also have to talk about that there was conflict between the different schools. There was conflict between the approach of the people of Hadith and the people uh, of Rai, the people that wanted to focus on understanding and rationality, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes to the detriment of uh, being clear on textual accuracy or verifying whether the text, meaning the hadith and so on and so forth, is accurate. And so that doesn't mean that the hadith school didn't have intellect to them, but the hadith school was definitely, at the forefront. They definitely had verification of the hadith text as a core issue, and they had more access. Contrary, a lot of times we want to keep like a game playing, and we want to act like Medina and Iraq historically were equivalent. Medina
Mm.
and Iraq were not historically equivalent. Medina was the abode of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
Right.
and it was an environment in which it was established. The i- the, the concept of Medina. Medina was established in Deen, right? Iraq was in the making, but
And I think in that Shine Wali Allah book, it goes into like I think I remember it saying that Imam Malik did not take hadith from Iraq, like he was very particular about who he would
Yeah.
take narrations
Yep.
from.
Yep. I mean, he took like a couple hadith from them, but not much.
Hmm.
Majority of the stuff he focused on the people of Medina, and that had his own limitations. That's why Imam Shafi, rahmatullahi alayhi, and rest of the other questions still just coming, to be dealt with, but just kind of this angle we're focusing on it. Imam Shafi'i ended up being in the middle of the squabble between the people of Iraq and the people of Medina. Imam Shafi'i, rahmatullahi alayhi, he um, he was in Mecca as well, so he took from Meccan scholarship, and he began to see some. He began to mature and want to take his own position on things, and he began to see that maybe there were some inconsistencies in the scholarly methodologies. That's how the madhab of Shafi'i came about, right? The early madhab of Imam Shafi'i is pretty much the Maliki school. The later madhab of Imam Shafi'i is his own school that he developed, right? And so the point being is that there's these discussions among the scholars themselves, and their discussions on issues of methodology, their discussions on issues of hadith. There's reason why they differ with each other, right? And so those differences shouldn't lead us to confusion. We have to understand that this, like Imam Sharani here to the left, he's pointed like this is a scholarly endeavor, right? This is the application of the mind to understand Quran and Sunnah, the light of revelation, and how it applies, which is something that we're obligated to, how it applies to life, how it applies to action in specific. So the madahib, in some ways, like for instance, especially when it comes to the Sahaba, when they agree with each other, that is one level of ijma' or consensus, right? So that still exists in the fiqh. Their opinions, right, depending on what kind of fiqh book you're using, um, and depending on how high level it is or whatever, but you're going to find their positions. You're going to find that their fiqh is mentioned. So it exists. Some books don't bring that type of stuff up because it's maybe of the dealing with the level of it or the orientation doesn't bring that type of thing in. But clearly, some books bring it, and so you become very familiar with their positions. This was part of the whole concept of the Salafi Dawah. Um, even before, right, the popularity of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab, even in Egypt, because the idea of the Salafiyah was to return back to the past and become familiar with the earlier generations, right? And that began in Al Azhar as well. You know what I'm saying? So when you study fiqh in Al Azhar, you study the origins of the madhab, the history. You study the positions of the Sahaba, the Tabi'in, and then you specialize also in one madhab, right? So you learn multiple approaches to study fiqh. Now, as far as what's easier or did you say what's easier, Resto?
Yeah.
As far as what's easy, it really depends on it. Really, when we say it was easy, we have to define what we mean, right? Uh, we have to define what we mean by what's easy.
What I mean is, at times, okay, let's go with modern times. What's easier for today's time? You know, I could see that the Hanbali was probably easier for this. That's just I'm just gonna say like a medieval time. You know what I mean? Let's just say that, right? But today's generation, today's time, what's there placed that's moving with our time?
You talking about like what's more lenient?
Not lenient, but more
Mhm.
more based on our I don't want to say life and culture. I just
Yeah.
let's just say, yeah, okay, life and culture and movement. You know what I mean?
Well, the reality, like the Hanbali school, contrary to what people say, there's a separation between the Hanbali madhab and the people around the Hanbali madhab. The Hanbali madhab is probably one of the most easiest madhabs to follow in general. In
Mhm.
terms of some scholars even have that are not Hanbali, they have called on the Hanbali madhab when it comes to what we call mu'amalat, especially economics, right? They say that the Hanbali madhab gives the most flexibility as far as contracts and all this type of stuff. Even when it comes to divorce, as an instance, the Hanbali madhab is probably one of the easier madhabs to work with. Um, as an example, the the Hanbali school does not acknowledge uh talaq al-bid'i, which is the talaq that is not done according to the sunnah, right? So, and then when you start looking at within the Hanbali school, like positions of Ibn Taymiyyah on these type of things, what that does is that gives the mufti, it gives the mufti the ability to navigate a little more in cases of divorce. Because if someone pronounces a talaq and the woman is on her menses in that school, that talaq doesn't take, it doesn't obtain, it's not a valid talaq.
Mhm.
Whereas in the other schools, that is. Right? You get what I'm saying, Resto?
Yeah, I got you.
Huh?
I think I do.
Well, I'm using that as an example.
Right.
I'm saying that, like, so what that does is that gives the mufti the ability to say, well, you know what? That's not even valid. We're not even going to consider that talak. It's not even valid. It's not done the right way. Right? Versus the other madahib, which I didn't bring up that point, the other schools, it's a valid talak, even though it's not done the right way.
Yeah.
Right? So they kind of they narrow the path for you. And that has its benefit and its harms, in any event. But that's just to kind of clarify. The Hanbali school probably right now is one of the schools that has the most work done on it in contemporary times. Uh, but those opinions may not always, they may not always jibe with the situation. Now, all of the madhahib, all of the madhahib have been at this point in time, all of them that have work that have been put into them in the contemporary age. And so you have living scholarship, okay? You have living scholars. And part of the problem is if you're not attached to the living scholarship, you're only stuck with book scholarship.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the book scholarship that you're attached to, the question is when were those books written? You know what I'm
Right.
saying? If those books were written 500 years ago, two, three, 400 years ago, then you're stuck with the fatwa. The fatwa meaning the positions that are taken at that time. Salah and all of that type of stuff, aside from some new issues, like for instance, praying on an airplane. Uh, those, that for the most part, it stays the same. The ruling
Mm.
on Salah, for the most part, it stays the same. The change comes in social issues, but even in Salah, sometimes it comes up. Sometimes some things come up in Salah issues, but for the most part, the core of the ibadah generally stays the same. It's
Right.
just certain, like Hajj now has changed a lot because of the population increased during the time of Hajj.
Yeah.
So you have the logistics of managing all of those people, and where's the flexibility and time, and so the Hajj brings up some challenges in that regard, but some schools they navigate right through it the way that it is. Um, that's why I was asking in terms of what? In terms of access, whether we like it or not. In terms of access, Abu Hanifa, uh, the Hanafi school has a lot of access. In terms of accessing their books in the English language. Uh, the Hanbali is almost right up there with them at this point. Translations may not be the greatest, but is almost up there. Shafi'i is right behind that, and then the Maliki school. The Maliki school still needs a lot of work.
Mm.
In terms of practice, people they say the Maliki school is akin, to the West. There's some positions in it that there's thinking in the Maliki school that has a lot to do with contemporary issues
Mm-hmm.
because of the fall of Al Andalus, right? But it all depends. You know what I'm saying? I know that that's not kind of what you want to hear, but it depends because, for instance, one of the issues with following a madhab is a teacher.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the issue with the following of the madhab. Um, then there's the issue of these books that are written in the past. We went through that 20 years ago. A lot of us brothers. So you're reading this text and you're like, oh yeah, this is like a traditional text, mashallah. And because there's so much hype that's put around it, and then it's just like, okay, how do you make sense of this?
Mm.
Mm.
You know, this is saying like we have to give zakat al-fitr in the staple of the people. Then you start r- running into, what can I give it with money?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Hanafi school has that.
What did they expect, like, for you to give it in gold, or was there a different currency?
What do you mean?
Like the giving the zakat, you said, to the people.
In the staple meaning in wheat, or
Oh,
or rice or something like that, or
okay.
and then in the Hanafi school you can give it according to its value, so then that allows you to give it in some uh money form.
Yeah.
Access is the biggest thing, people, in my
Mm-hmm.
book. Anything is easy with access, as far as the madhahib are concerned. You know, it's easy with access. My the and Seeker's Hub doesn't mean that I'm 100% endorsing them. Everything that they see, that doesn't mean that. But Seeker's Hub probably is one of the easiest, most experienced ways to study a madhab in terms of these educational institutions.
Okay. Can you ask them fiqh questions
You can
or
ask,
find answers to fiqh questions?
yeah.
Okay.
But the problem that I have with all of these institutions is that show they don't show regard for the fiqh councils that exist today,
Mm,
right? So there's like multiple fiqh councils. There's the fiqh council of Jordan, there's the fiqh council of Morocco, there's the fiqh council of India, there's the fiqh council of Mecca, fiqh council of Jeddah, and those fiqh councils in Saudi consist of ulama from throughout the world. So those who come and they try to tarnish the standing of those fiqh councils and say, well, this is Salafi, that's BS.
mm,
You have leading scholars from various madahib, they are on those fiqh councils, right? And then you have like something like a Lejna Daima, which is, you know, the standing committee in Saudi Arabia that's more representative of kind of like the Hanbali Salafi orientation.
mm-hmm,
But the Fiqh Council of Jordan is predominantly Shafi'i, Morocco is predominantly Maliki, and you also have Al Azhar. Al Azhar has a couple different orientations in terms of institutions. So you have Dar al Ifta, and then you have the Masjid, and then you have Al Buhuth, which is the research center. So then you have the Grand Mufti as another. There's you know there's investments. Not all countries have the same level of investment in the knowledge of Islam. So that's one of them where the knowledge of Islam exists in a very profound way.
mm,
So the problem that I have is like students don't refer to the contemporary scholars, right? They get fatwas from books, but they're not even looking to see what research was done in today's time. And when you look at what research is done in today's time, a lot of the madhahib are going to be adjusted to the situations of the time when you're aware of what the scholarship is doing in today's time. Right. So there's no gap between us and the past 100% because it's filled by those institutions. And those institutions are represented by bodies of scholarship, not just an individual or two, which makes a big difference. On some issues, especially that affect the large body of the Ummah, uh, you can't have that. You can't have that type of fatwa being uh, constructed by an individual. It has to be constructed by a group due to just the nature uh, of impact and effect that that position is going to take. So you can't have just an individual taking up a position for a large mass of people. You have to have it has to be studied by multiple scholars, right? So that you have group input, shura, that is done in order to best resolve the issues. So my thing is like any madhab can work with the condition that you have access to his books and his teachers, and they are also keeping up with the current scholarship of the time, right? And another corrective point to that is that they understand the society that they live in. Because sometimes what some people are doing, they are keeping up with scholarship, but it's from another country. And in the fatawa, which is the plural fatwa, or the opinions that are being issued out, relate to that country. They're not taking into consideration the realities of the people here. And
Mm.
that's why we need our own scholarship. It's not just a fancy reality, or it's a necessity. You know, when you start like the Hanafi school in terms of marriage and divorce is terrible in this environment. Divorce, according to the Hanafi madhab, it can come about by anything. You know what I'm saying? And the people, you know, it's a time period where people to say, "Oh, well, you're playing with the fiqh." No, the fiqh is there was massive debates about how to deal with divorce in Egypt among the scholars in Al Azhar. Massive debates, and one of my teachers was at the forefront of saying we just need to shift to um that divorce doesn't obtain, that there is no divorce except by two witnesses. Just like you need two witnesses to enter the contract, you need two witnesses to leave the contract of marriage. And I personally agree with that, even if it's a minority opinion. Why? Because that position does more to support the objective of the Sharia, which is the preservation of the family, than a position which facilitates divorce very easily. We only want
Sheikh
to
Hussein?
facilitate divorce easily if we only want to facilitate divorce easily if there's like abuse or things like that. But we don't want to facilitate divorce. We don't want the religious thinking to undermine the family when they're going through difficulty. We want the fiqh to facilitate for them to navigate difficulties so that they can preserve their marriage. But for some people, sometimes also when you start tying in Sufi teaching into fiqh, that's a discussion that needs clarity. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes, you know, the Sufi teaching blended into fiqh creates its own set of problems. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I was just asking about the two witnesses. I agree with you. I agree with you that it should be like two witnesses, or nowadays, like people text each other,
Yeah, all
you
of that
know,
has to come
all
into the
kinds of
fiqh, that
crazy stuff.
all that has to come into the agreement that people make, that this is what we're going to
Right.
follow.
So it's okay to put that, in your agreement, regardless of whether that person, whatever their madhab is, they still have to honor it, right? Like if that's what you've requested and you put it in writing, you know, that's it. If they agree to it, then that's
Yeah, I
what the
mean, at
protocol
the
is.
end, it'll be tested sometimes. Sometimes it's tested because part of the problem that you have, and I had wrote about that. Not it was like not anything extensive, but there was a post that I made about that, and it was actually quoting the definition of a madhalim. And the definition of a madhalim is acts of, the cases of grievance or the pursuing of your rights in the case where there's abuse and so on, mostly from systemic issues like, you know, when people raise a case against the corporation or the government and this, that type of thing. But the idea that there's points in time where there's disputes that arise in terms of one's rights, that's what I wanted to emphasize. Like sometimes there's cases where it's like, you know, there's an issue that comes up and you're just like, I want my rights, and so in the context of husband and wife, if the idea with what I was bringing up is that that takes place in all of society, right? In all of society, there could be uh, instances which we find ourselves in wherein we're looking for our rights to be met. But in the context of husband and wife, when that comes up, when there's dispute and things are said, the issue that arises is, will the couple stick to what they agreed? So why did I bring up the idea of madalim? Well, the idea of madalim or grievances in general, whether it's in the workplace and so on and so forth, what you have there uh, is the idea of ilzam. The idea of ilzam means that you have some sort of body that can obligate, or you have a way to obligate a person to follow through.
Yeah, because we don't have a Sharia court.
It's not only a Sharia court, like you're right in that case, but even like, it's not only a Sharia court, it's also it is not, because you can have a Sharia court, it doesn't have any power.
Mm,
You see what I'm saying? It's the power behind that, to be able to, or you can have a Sharia court and it's not fair or equitable. Like you have some of these things in England and so on and so forth. And I heard some cases that are extremely problematic. You know what I'm saying? Think about this country that you have lower level courts and higher level courts. And when things don't work out in the lower level courts, they're pushed out to the higher level courts. There's appeals and all that type of stuff. So the idea of, can it be executed? The idea of, can a person be bound? Is it binding? How is it binding? That's what I'm talking about. And
mm,
that comes along with power. That comes along with power. Sometimes in the past, back in the day, there were certain things that if there was like a contract, you didn't need a Sharia court because you had brother Abdul Malik. You know what I'm saying? Abdul Malik was in the background. It's like, no, you know, we're not going to tell you we're going to whip your butt, but it's very clear we'll whip your butt if you don't follow through. So I'm not advocating that type of thing, but what I'm saying is like using that as an example to say, when you have the ability to bind and implement. Right? This is the whole debate in the country right now with regard to ICE, right? And so why do some people, is it always the case that people that root for ICE are racist? No. Some of them are like, we're tired of the killing, we're tired of the crime increase. You know what I'm saying? And so they see ICE, and I hear some of the commentary. They say, let the police do policing.
mm.
You know what I'm saying? I'm not, of course, I don't agree with that stuff, but just to be fair to the argument, the idea of force being used to implement and execute a position, right? And so The idea of force comes in with the police that's outside of the court, but related to the court system. The police institution of policing is related to the court. The courts is an extension of government. So that's the thing that comes up. And so one of the things that's interesting too is that when you look at the fiqh earlier on, you didn't need any of this type of stuff because the people themselves, right? The people themselves bound themselves to practice. There's cases where people go to the prophets of Allah and they're like, I committed this sin and that sin, and I know that I deserve, you know, to be held accountable for whatever it is that I did. So you know, the people themselves internalize the reality of law. So a lot of times when you only need force, so to speak, is when there's dispute to resolve the dispute. Because one person may say, "Why should I follow that? I didn't agree to that. There's a misunderstanding." So then now the other person says, "Yes, you did." They want to enforce that. So now the dispute needs to be resolved. It's not always the case that the person is trying to backdoor somebody else. Sometimes it's just a misunderstanding.
Right.
So you need force, a third party with force to intervene and have something implemented. And you really, sometimes it's just the threat of force, or sometimes it's just authority, not even force, in the sense that we understand. If there's a person of authority, then people respect, and so then they fall in line. Before that could be a father, that could be the imam and the fathers, could be big brother. You know, that's the so that's the long run of when we start talking about the madahib. It's like, really any madhab can be easy when you have good scholarship, teaching, and when you have access to that scholarship, right? Because you can have good scholarship that's teaching, but their stuff remains in books or videos. There's no sohbah, there's no companionship, there's no real access. Sohbah means, like, that you have access and you have time with that person. You know. But now, I mean, in English, you know what I'm saying? It's getting better. It's getting better, like compared to when I came into Islam. Like you have some books, at least at the basic level. We're good when it comes to the foundational pillars of Islam. We don't have to have 1,000 books. You know what I'm saying? But we have some books that are, yes, they may be, we don't have what you have in Arabic in other cultures and so on and so forth in terms of extensive research databases. What I'm thinking of is encyclopedias and other things. Like you have digital access in Arabic, but when it comes to English at the foundational level, I have a couple books that are sitting right on my shelf here. When I look at El Fiqh al Minhaji and Shafi Fiqh, that's a contemporary book that's written and is written in the Shafi school and is written in a way, is written and there was a push to correct the way that fiqh was written and introduced to the people, and it abides by that demand. So you're studying fiqh, right? You're studying fiqh, and I'll give you an example that you have to perform wudu in the order that was mentioned, right? So the mentioning of the order comes by way, it comes by way of the Quran, right? O you who believe, when you stand up for the prayer, wash your faces and your hands up to the elbows and wipe your heads and wash your feet to the ankles. That's the order. And that the ayah of the Quran is what I just read that's translated. So then in the sixth point, it says to perform wudu in the order mentioned. It's followed up and it says this is understood from the ayah, which we already read it, which lists the integrals of wudu in order. It is also understood from what he sallallahu alaihi wasallam did, for he only performed wudu in that order, that is, as it is in the ayah. And this is confirmed by authentic hadith. One of these is in the aforementioned hadith of Abu Hurairah, which contains the conjunction. Now they're reading into Arabic, thumma, and then, showing like that there's an indication of order in the Arabic language. He did this, then. He did this, then. That idea that when the word then in its Arabic equivalent is used is indicating that there's an order. Imam Nawawi, and then he says, and this conjunction is used by unanimous agreement to indicate sequence. Means the idea of then is there to put things in sequential order. And Nawawi says in Al Majmu', the companion's proof is from the Sunnah. There are exhaustive hadith that are authentic from groups of companions that demonstrate the Prophet's wudu, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of them describe it as being in this order, despite their abundance and the abundance of places in which they saw him perform it, as well as the abundance of their differences in describing it. That is once, twice, three times, and so forth. Despite all these differences, or all the differences, the wudu is only described as being in this order. That's just one way, that's just one point. Like that builds a scholar, even, or at least a scholarly understanding. Actually, the book is 3 volumes in its original Arabic, but it's teaching you what is the basis of the position, meaning what is the evidence, and how you and why it is that is understood in a specific way within the context of the Shafi'i school. And it's teaching you the references, points of language, points of hadith, points of understanding the Quran. You know, that's excellent. I have a Hanafi one. This one is translated as the 5 pillars of Islam. And so he lists summary of the obligatory points of wudu. The language is a little tough. It's a summary of the compulsory rituals of ablution. Washing the face, washing the hands and the forearms up to and including the elbows. Wiping a quarter of the head with the wet hands. Washing the feet and heels up to and including the ankles. That's the summary point. So you know what to take away from the chapter, right? But it begins with okay, wudu is an integral part of the Islamic practice, and it preludes or is before other acts of worship such as prayer, reciting the Quran. In other words, one should have wudu before these things. Circling the Kaaba. Muslims are encouraged to be in a state of ablution or wudu as much as possible, so as to be in a ritually pure state and be ready to undertake religious worship with convenience. Then it goes into the whole discussion of Arabic, what wudu means, And then it says, according to some scholars, wudu itself became obligatory in Mecca. That's vital information. When did wudu become obligatory? And the verse describing it was revealed in Medina, right? And Usama bin Zayd narrates, the angel Jibril came to the Prophet ﷺ at the beginning of Revelation and taught him how to make wudu. When he finished the wudu, the angel Jibril showed him how to clean the private parts and sprinkled some water over them. Uh, so it's interesting, the idea when you go deep, you know, some scholars say wudu itself became obligatory in Medina, but the ayah of the Quran that described the details was revealed in Medina. I'm sorry, the wudu became obligatory in Mecca, and then the ayah describing the details was revealed in Medina. That's something to reflect upon. And
That's what I was asking you yesterday about for public restrooms, because you can't sit down, so pouring the water is very difficult.
you could sit down, but you had to clean the bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, what if you don't want to sit down?
With the you're in a jam because you're in a
Like,
jam
public
because you have to
bathrooms
go
out
to the
here are
bathroom.
nasty.
You have to go to the, but that's why you have to get smart at picking. And it's not an insult on you, but it's a skill. You have to become skilled at knowing what bathrooms to use. It's a skill. Like Walgreens, Starbucks is becoming a mess. Before, Starbucks bathrooms were impeccable, right? Oh, I have a meeting right now. Inshallah, I forgot about that. So let's end here and regroup. Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair.
Okay. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.